All right, welcome to September. Blink, and it's going to be 2025. It's time to introduce a new grain for our Grains Explorer Challenge that we are doing here in 2024. And this month, it's probably one of the most common ancient wheat varieties that is used, the easiest to work with, and the cheaper one of the ancient wheat varieties, and that is spelt. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, we talk all things real whole grains, all from a biblical perspective. I teach you how to mill your own wheat, to bake with 100% freshly milled wheat, and more. So for those who are new to this video and this channel, we have a challenge going on for 2024. That is our Grains Explorer Challenge. And basically, we are exploring the world of grains, and I'm introducing a new grain each month, kind of challenging ourselves to work with a grain that we may not be as familiar with. Now, for the full adventure, I recommend signing up for the Grainy Bunch. My Grainies get extra recipes, we get monthly Zoom calls, and a great little community. So to check out all the information about our Grains Explorer Challenge, sign up for the Grainy Bunch, you just need to go to grainsandgrit.com/grainsexplorer, and be sure to check out the playlist up here to catch up on all the videos that you may have missed so far. All right, so as always, here's what we're going to cover on this video. 1, we're going to talk about a general overview and history of spelt. 2, the nutritional benefits. 3, what spelt is used for. And 4, how to use spelt in your kitchen, and specifically how I like to use spelt in my baking and cooking. So before we begin, be sure to comment below. Let me know, do you like spelt? Have you tried it? What are your favorite recipes? Let us know all the things in the comments below. I also would like to say that I got a new cookbook. This is called Cooking with Ancient Grains by Laura McBride. And especially if you're interested in the ancient grains, she has excellent information about these grains. Some things I disagree with a little bit, but it's a massive cookbook. I think I got this from Azure Standard. I will link it for you below, especially if you were interested in ancient grains. And also she talks a lot about like the sprouting of the grains, using sprouted flour, things like that. So far it's been an interesting read. So check that out if you are interested in the ancient grains. So first of all, about spelt, general overview and history of spelt. It's pretty much a common consensus, although there is some disagreement, but bottom line, like many of our ancient grains, we basically trace it back to Mesopotamia, specifically the Fertile Crescent, known as the cradle of civilization. We do know from Bible times that is the location of the Garden of Eden, Abraham, where just modern civilization began, and we can trace spelt all the way back there. It is typically believed that it's preceded only by emmer and einkorn, and that it generally is some sort of hybridized mix between emmer and some sort of wild wheat. So bottom line, it's wheat. Okay, spelt is wheat. Don't worry about getting into the whole genetics of it, but it is just one of those wheats that trace back for thousands of years. It actually was most popular from pretty much the Bronze Age all the way through medieval times. So it used to be a very common wheat, not so much anymore now. We'll get to that later. It is mentioned in Roman poetry, in Dante's Inferno, in Greek mythology. It's believed that Demeter gave spelt for harvesting to human beings. And spelt is mentioned in the Bible, depending on what version you're using. And I actually encourage you to do a little bit of a Bible study with that because it's kind of interesting. 800 years ago, Hildegard von Bingen, sorry if I mispronounced that, known as Saint Hildegard to Catholics. And she also is generally considered to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. Here's what she said about spelt way back in like the early 1100s. The spelt is the best of grains. It is rich and nourishing and milder than other grains. It produces a strong body and healthy blood to those who eat it, and it makes the spirit of man light and cheerful. If someone is ill, boil some spelt, mix it with egg, and this will heal him like a fine ointment. So I find this interesting that Hildegard is German because spelt is actually quite popular in Germany, and it has been for quite some time. In fact, in Germany, it's actually known as Dinkel, which I know is a funny name, but that's what it's called in German. But you may know it as another name because in Italy, it is known as farro. Now, one thing to know is spelt. It is wheat, thus it is a gluten grain. This is not a gluten-free grain. However, people say that it's different gluten than our modern wheat varieties, but I have a theory about that. We'll get to it in a minute. Just hold on. So even though spelt was extremely popular for a very, very long time, it actually declined in popularity in our modern times, mainly due to how modern agriculture is. The difference between spelt and our typical modern wheats is it comes down to how it's harvested. The reason why it's declined is because now with our modern tractors and combines, how most wheat is harvested nowadays is when the farmers go out to harvest in the field. It is also threshing the wheat and removing that outer husk all in one fell swoop. Boom, and it's done. Spelt is not like that. It is a bit more difficult to remove that outer hull, and so it has to be harvested in the field, and then it has to have, through step number 2, to actually have that hull removed mechanically. And because it's a 2-step process, not 1-step process, that is what makes it a bit more expensive. If you can do things in one fell swoop, that's going to make things faster and cheaper. So even though spelt is still grown and used today, that's why it's not as easily found than our typical modern varieties. So while it was popular in Europe for a while, it actually didn't make it over to the United States until about the 1890s. But again, was not really able to compete whenever modern agriculture kind of got started. But it actually has gained popularity now due to a lot of different factors. But the main thing is it's now being stated that spelt is easier to digest. It's easier on those with gluten sensitivities, so on and so forth. Now, here's where we get into Felicia opinion based on all that I know about grains. Every time I look about spelt, when I was researching about spelt, over and over again, I was seeing, oh, spelt, it's easier to digest. It's better for those with gluten sensitivities than our modern wheats. However, if you are not new here, you've heard me say this before, it is not the wheat, it is the flour. So most of the time when you are buying an ancient grain flour, be it spelt, or einkorn or kamut, most of the time you're actually buying it in its whole grain form. So they generally grind it up. They don't sift it. They're not making white flour, although you can find white flour varieties. But I was finding that generally it is sold in more of its whole grain form, as opposed to our modern wheat. When you go and buy flour, most of the time it is dead white flour. So if you're comparing the flours, then yeah, because white flour has no nutrients in it really. So if you're comparing just white flour that is made of our modern wheats next to a spelt flour that is still whole grain, then yes, that spelt flour is going to be better than your dead white flour. But I believe if you are milling your own grain, so even if it's modern grains, our hard red, our hard white, our soft white wheats, even being modern grains, if you were consuming it whole, if you were milling it yourself and baking that bread, most likely you're not really going to notice a difference between that and spelt, other than how it works while baking. But from a nutritional level, from a digestibility level, I think the key is just milling your own grains yourself. Again, it's not the grain, it's the flour that's been messed with. So make sure your flour is good. And as always, the best is to mill your own grains, because even if you're buying spelt flour, even if it's in a whole grain form, remember just in 3 days of milling those grains, 90% of nutrients have been oxidized. You still get the fiber benefits, but that vitamin E is pretty much gone, and other nutrients that oxidize, it's just not there. So while it's better than buying white dead flour, mill it yourself, and mill it whenever you need it for the best nutritional benefits. Which leads us to number 2, the nutritional benefits of spelt. And this one is actually very interesting. So like any whole grain, spelt is an excellent source of carbohydrates and fiber. And it's also particularly rich in iron, magnesium, phosphorus, B vitamins, and zinc. Again, these are things that are very common across multiple different whole grains, even our modern wheat, so long as it is whole grain. Now, let's compare it to modern wheats typically. And this I did find a little bit of conflicting information. So all depends on the source that you're looking at. But overall, I was seeing that spelt is a bit higher in protein content than other wheats. So not by much, 15.6% protein content in spelt, as opposed to around like 14.9% in our typical wheats. Again, it depends on the wheat. Some are higher, some are lower in protein. This does not translate to gluten formation. Modern wheats typically are a bit better with that gluten formation. Spelt's a little bit trickier, but as far as protein goes, spelt's a little bit higher. It also has a little bit higher fat content at 2.5% compared to 2.1%. And the fiber is where I was seeing the conflicting information, because some sources were stating that it was higher in fiber than typical wheat. Some sources were saying it was lower in fiber, and then other sources said that there was just no contrast at all. So bottom line, consume whole grains. Whole grains are very good in fiber, so don't get hung up. But I do believe, I think the hard red wheat generally reigns as far as fiber goes, but it's not that huge of a difference. Just consume whole grains. Okay, so what is spelt used for? Unlike the other grains that we have looked at, there's really not any fancy, crazy off-the-wall uses. Some grains that we have studied so far are used in pharmaceuticals or other types of uses, not really for spelt. It's predominantly used for your typical baking and cooking, usually used as a flour. But fun fact, like many of the wheat and other grains, of course there are alcoholic uses for it. And there are some that use spelt today. So there actually is a spelt vodka. The brands like Distilleries First and V1 make a 100% organic vodka. There's also spelt beer. This is mainly whenever you find it in, for those who like to brew their own beers, home brewers, you can use spelt. And there actually are breweries in Bavaria, which is South Germany, and also Belgium, that actually prefer to use spelt to brew their own beer. And last but not least, some American spirits, such as premium spelt whiskey, are, you guessed it, made with spelt. So if you ever get your hands on these and you try them and you actually are used to consuming these type of spirits and alcohol, let me know in the comments below if you can notice any sort of difference. All right, so now my favorite part. How do you use spelt in your kitchen, and my favorite ways to use spelt. So fun fact is, as far as the ancient grains go, spelt was my first ancient grain of the wheat varieties that I ever used. So a little tip about using spelt is it actually sometimes does not need as much liquid as other wheat varieties. So whenever you use it and convert recipes yourself, you may find that you need about a quarter less of your liquid, but it kind of all depends. You may need to experiment. I actually do want to experiment with a 100% freshly milled spelt bread recipe. And so if I have that up, I will link that up in the description box for y'all. I hope to have that up soon. But otherwise, as far as your baking and cooking, spelt can be switched out for regular wheat flour at a 1-to-1 ratio for the most part. But again, it's not as strong of a gluten as like a hard red or hard white wheat. So you may find a little bit of tweaking is needed there, or, it just may not turn out like your typical hard red or hard white wheat breads do. But spelt is also very versatile, where you can switch it between your lighter baked goods like cookies, brownies, and also your yeast breads, where I wouldn't necessarily cross the two with your hard wheats. Now, my favorite thing to use spelt is that it's actually pancakes and waffles. Spelt pancakes and waffles are amazing. And I have those recipes for you down below. You'll notice that it calls for, hard white, soft white, whatever. Use the same amount of spelt that's called for in the recipe. I've never really noticed a difference with the water, so keep the liquid the same. And these are so good. Like, especially this, it gives such a wonderful nutty type flavor, but not an overwhelming like whole wheat flavor, and it's still kind of light. So definitely try it out. Pancakes and waffles are my favorite thing to use spelt. They also do great in muffins as well, and I do recommend these recipes would be the easiest for beginners. So if you're wanting to dip your toe in the ancient grains, spelt is the easiest one to use, in my opinion. And then with these recipes, they're actually even easier than attempting an entire yeast loaf. Spelt is also used in my Ezekiel bread recipe, which I have it for the bread machine or for the oven. Links below, which really reminds me I need to update my Ezekiel bread recipe video because I have tweaked some things in that recipe. Now, whenever I want to make a yeast bread, my favorite combination is about 2/3 hard red wheat to 1/3 spelt. And using that combination gets me a nice, beautiful loaf. That hard red really helps that. But the flavor with the spelt and the hard red is absolutely delicious and amazing. And that spelt kind of softens that hard red a little bit. And it just gives a really, really good flavor. I've never gone up to 50-50. I've always used just a little bit more hard red. So again, my simple yeast bread loaf recipe will be listed below. I will link it for y'all below, and just try this combination out. So just 2 parts hard red, 1 to 1 part spelt. So 2/3 hard red, 1/3 spelt is kind of that ratio. And you can just mill it all at once, mix it all together. But I find that it is so good, and you definitely need to try it. So there you go with spelt. Let me know if you learned something new, and in the comments, let me know how you like to use spelt yourself. And for those of you who want to learn more about the Grains Explorer Challenge, then be sure to check out this playlist here, catch you up on all the videos that we've done for the Grains Explorer Challenge. And if you're wanting to check out that Ezekiel bread recipe, then you need to check that out here. Easy way to use spelt as well as a ton of other grains. And as always, I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.